A couple Sunday mornings ago, we finished up a lesson on the Beatitudes, talking about persecution. There, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's Matthew chapter 5 and verse 10. Then he explained what persecution was. Blessed are those who are blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Then he gives the reason why we should, he says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad. He gives the reason, for so persecuted they the prophets who were before you. And Jesus had talked about how that he had been persecuted and his followers would be persecuted, but it was a persecution that has always been there against God's people, starting from the time of Abel, going clear through the history of God's people. And Daniel is one of those people who suffered a lot of persecution. Now, if we kind of work around what Jesus said, Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12 in particular, we come up with this: "Blessed are they who are found guilty of righteousness, when lies, perverse judgments, and perverse legislation are used to entrap them in goodness." It's a good thing to be found guilty of righteousness. Such is the case of a man by the name of Daniel. So we're going to read this passage. It's up here from the book of Daniel. Now, you'll see what I mean. "Then the high officials and the satraps," which princes or governors, some translations even say presidents of the various, like governors of areas, "sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom." Why? Because he had become very powerful in the kingdom because of his good advice to the emperor. "But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault," hence the title of our lesson tonight, "because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.' Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, 'O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes a petition or prayer to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and of the Persians, which cannot be revoked.' Therefore King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God." Now I want you to understand, in all of this, Daniel was a man of integrity and righteousness. He was a man who was being found guilty of righteousness, guilty of integrity. But this leads us to something very important. Daniel proved some things here. As a Jewish man in his teens, when he is taken from Jerusalem during the time of the Babylonian siege, and finally there are 3 carrying away, exiles of the children of Israel at the time of the Babylonian captivity, before Jerusalem is finally destroyed. I believe that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken in the first exile, the first time that people were taken to Babylon. Now Babylon's been destroyed. You have a narrative in the book of Daniel talking about his dealings with Nebuchadnezzar. Now this is after the Medes and the Persians have taken over, destroyed the Babylonian Empire. You have a new empire there. So Darius and the Medes, they've taken over, and Daniel's become a counselor for this new emperor. So he's been made to serve under two foreign nations, two foreign empires. But he was taken basically as a teenager to the Babylonians and forced to do some things that were against what he was supposed to do. They tried to force him to do things against his religion. But he served in these courts, and he served admirably. But Daniel had proven several things to the world as his life was turned upside down because of this great persecution. He proved that one can survive in a hostile environment if he trusts in God. We can survive in a hostile environment if we trust in God. He proved that one can worship God correctly regardless of the beliefs of others in his presence. We don't have to put on a show for other people. We don't have to try to please other people. We have to please God. Amen. That's the important thing. Third, he proved that one can be profitable to the world without being worldly. He was profitable to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire with his advice. "O king, here's some advice that you need to do." And he rose in power in that empire. When it was destroyed and the Medes and Persians came in and took over, he gave them good advice too. But he never forsook his God. And his advice was always good advice. Good advice. Not good vice. Vice isn't good. Good advice. And so there it was. He rose in power there. And it always made the worldly people who craved power jealous of him. He proved that one could be profitable to the world without being worldly. 4, he proved that the qualities of integrity are sought out by those who need good people under them. Why would you want a crook serving you? Why would you want an unethical, immoral person serving under you? What you're doing is you're putting your own self in danger there, aren't you?
Amen.
Yeah, you put a liar and a cheat and a power-seeking, hungry person beneath you, and you're in danger. It's hard to tell what they'll do to you. And you see what happened with these princes and satraps and such, what they were willing to do to Daniel to gain power. That was number 4, okay? So, integrity. Being sought out. Well, what are those qualities of integrity? Honesty, decisions based on objective good, not subjective good, what's in it for me, but the objective good, what's good for the nation. Even though he didn't like the nation, Babylon, they destroyed Jerusalem, but he still helped the king. Why? Because it was God's will that Jerusalem be destroyed. He helped the Medo-Persians. Why? Because it was God's will that if somebody who was a Jew would be somewhere up there near the head of power, he could help his people survive till the time when they could go back. The same as with Queen Esther. Maybe she was brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. But those qualities there, say, an objective good, altruistic values. These qualities were missing in the other presidents and princes, the satraps, all of them. That's why Daniel stood out so well. Now, Daniel's manner of life was rewarded by the king, but it was scrutinized by these evil princes, right? They were keeping an eye on him The king had kept an eye on him, or the emperor. He had watched him. He was proud of him. Okay? He just didn't realize it when these people were trying to trap Daniel, to accuse him and get the king to do something evil to him. You know, if you don't want to get caught doing evil to somebody, what do? You trick somebody else into doing the evil to them, right? Yeah, have you ever had anybody, you know, kind of coerce you, maneuver you to do something that you shouldn't do? And then all of a sudden you say, you know what, I was had. Well, that's what was going on here. They had spies watching Daniel constantly, but you know, they couldn't catch him doing anything wrong. They couldn't catch him doing anything against the king. Somebody who had, there were motives there, right? Because he'd like to have gone back to Jerusalem, wouldn't he? Surely. And see his people go back to Jerusalem. The princes then had this dilemma. They conspired to trap Daniel by creating a dilemma between the civil law and God's law. And people will do that today, won't they? You think about politicians, they'll use God's law up to a certain point, and then they'll make a law and say, well, you got to obey this law. God's law says you obey the civil law, and we got this civil law. But wait a minute, I got to obey God's law over the civil law. And you know, it sometimes takes a lot of courage to do that. So they played upon the king's pride to get him to sign a decree that essentially raised him to the status of godhood. Hey, that no one should petition or pray to any, listen to that, any god or man except you for 30 days. Oh boy. Whew. Pray to me for 30 days and no other god or man? Wow, that sounds pretty good. Darius' pride got the best of him because he wasn't thinking that they were trying to trap anybody. They were trying to, what? Praise him, give him honor, give him glory, right? They didn't have that in mind at all. Not at all. So the decree went forth that for the next 30 days, if anyone was caught praying to a god or a man other than Darius, he would be thrown into the den of lions. The trap was set because those princes knew exactly what Daniel was going to do. He was going to pray to his God. Because Daniel, by this time, is of fairly good age. He's not a teenager anymore. In fact, he's probably somewhere close to 80 years old. You know, at least maybe a little bit older than that. So, you know, here's a man who's lived such a good life that he's not going to stop being a good, righteous man, an honest man of integrity, worshiping his God. And he goes and he does exactly what he'd been doing regularly. He prays 3 times a day. So the trap was really a test, wasn't it? It was a test. Would Daniel remain faithful to God, or would he stumble at doing the will of God? Okay? And remember what I've told you. It's not a matter of life and death. It's a matter of life and eternal life for Daniel. You say, oh, well, what's the big deal here? It is a big deal. It's a very big deal. Daniel's reaction, look at it. When he knew that the law was official, he went straight home to pray to God. He did not hide it. He allowed the men to see exactly what he was doing. Did he want to be caught? Not necessarily that he wanted to be caught, but he wasn't going to quit. Nobody likes a quitter, do they? I've heard that. Nobody likes a quitter. I guess it depends on what you're quitting. Okay?
That's true.
Yeah. But nobody would like a quitter in this instance, okay? Especially God. God would not like a quitter in this instance. So Daniel, he didn't complain that the law was unconstitutional. Yet where'd he go? He went home, right? To do what? To pray. He didn't go down to the court and say, I want to file a case. This law is unconstitutional. That's what people do today, isn't it? Find a lawyer, head down to the courthouse. No, he didn't do that. He didn't blame the king, did he? He didn't go in because, you know, he was a counselor to the king. He didn't go in, King, this is wrong. You need to change your mind. He didn't do it. Why? Because he knew better than to do that. The king's been puffed up by these men. This needs to play out, doesn't it? He needs to see it. He needs to realize the damage that has been done. Why does Darius need to realize the damage that's been done? Hopefully so it wouldn't happen again. Is it going to happen again? Probably. Probably. Okay? But hopefully he'll learn the lesson. So, no, he doesn't complain. He doesn't say anything to the king. He just goes about doing what he's always done. And when he had been delivered from the lion's den, he didn't complain to the king. He didn't point his finger and say, you should have known better. That was a bonehead move, you know, or nothing like that. Afterwards, listen to what he says. Verses 21 and 22, Daniel chapter 6. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, before God, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. I didn't try to harm you, king. I didn't. Now, did those presidents, the satraps and the princes, did they try to harm the king? They sure did. You know how? By harming Daniel, a good counselor, a good man who was giving the king good advice. So, here's the question then. How can we be people like Daniel? Have a character like Daniel. Be like Daniel was. Because isn't that what the Bible's trying to really teach us? Now, I believe it's a true story, but still, we got to come out of that true story with some understanding. So we need to be unselfish. So unselfish that we are willing, even under the severest forms of persecution, to seek the well-being of others. Huh. Daniel could have run away. Daniel could have done a lot of things. What did Daniel do? He stood up. For whose well-being did he stand up? For his own well-being? He was thrown in a den of lions. Did God have an option for saving him? How many of our brethren were thrown to the lions in the 1st century AD and didn't survive? A bunch of them, right? A bunch of them. God doesn't always save in those circumstances, does he? Daniel was running a risk. But God did spare him. If Daniel had lost influence with the king, the next move of the princes would be to what? Destroy all of the Jews. Destroy all the Israelites. Why? Because that's what that persecution was all about, has been about for a long time. Didn't the Babylonians try to get rid of them? Yes, they did. The Medo-Persians, they're trying to get rid of them. Later on, even in the Medo-Persian Empire, at the time of Esther, very important for one reason, right? Because the Messiah comes through the lineage of the Jews. destroy them, wipe them off the face of the earth at that time, we get no Messiah. We get no Christ. We have no Savior. So you see how important it is for these people to stand up to these things. We need to understand that we can serve the king while obeying God, but we cannot always serve God while obeying the king. Okay? We can serve the king while obeying God, but we can't always serve God while obeying the king. So we've got to make sure that we're obeying God. Acts 5:29, but Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men. And we need to understand that today, God may not save us from the lions. Again, there are many Christians, first century, that he didn't save. But he'll save us from the eternal fires of hell if we'll trust and obey him. That's important. The spiritual things are so very important. But there are the lessons there that help us to understand that. Justice. Right? God's justice will prevail. And it may be on Judgment Day. It may not be on this earth, but it will prevail. And we have that to look forward to. See, it's not about life and death. It's about life and eternal life. Amen. It's about heaven. So Daniel is like a breath of fresh air in a time period when many of God's people were caving into the world in order to extend their earthly lives. How many Jews bowed down to the golden statue at the time when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wouldn't? And they got thrown in the fiery furnace. How many bowed down? How many in that time period of 30 days didn't pray to God? Maybe they didn't pray to King Darius, but maybe just didn't pray to God either in that 30-day period to save their lives. See? We think of it on those terms. Well, Daniel remained a man of godly character throughout the entire ordeal, throughout his entire life. And Daniel was the same whether people were watching him or not. And that's the true test of our Christian character, isn't it? Are we the same? And integrity. Integrity. You know what integrity is, right? It's like you have a steel beam, and you want to test whether that steel beam will break. You're testing its integrity. So the pressure's put on that steel beam. When will it break? When will it break? Does it have integrity? Well, the same is with us. Persecution is one of the things that puts pressure on us to see when we will break. If we're people of integrity, persecution is not going to break us. We're going to remain strong. We're going to remain faithful to God. And we'll be the same whether people are watching us or not. We'll be God's people. Okay? So, Charlie, I run out of slides.
You did pretty good.
It says close. Why don't we close? That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it?
I don't know, you did pretty good.
Okay.
I'll hang in there.
We're doing okay. We will close for tonight. I thank you so very much for your time, for your attention.
Thank you.
And appreciate y'all so very much. And if you have any, let your request be made known as we stand and sing the